Okay, I believe the recording has started. This is the Housing Steering Committee. Committee Member Hara.
Here.
Committee Member Paulson.
Here.
Committee Member Wagstaff.
Here.
No, Committee Member Kusler is absent.
Okay, Elisa, are you running the meeting or how?
Yeah,
how
let
are we doing?
me get it started. So the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from December 8th, 2022. If anyone would like to make a motion to approve those or have any corrections.
I'd be happy to move to approve.
I'll second that.
All right, all those in favor?
Yeah.
Can you call roll, Allison?
Yes, sorry about that. Committee Member Hara.
Yes.
Committee Member Paulson.
Yes.
Committee Member Wagstaff.
Yes.
All right. The minutes are approved. And then the third item on the agenda is, I had the wrong year of the housing element. It's the housing element for 2023 to 2031. Review and discuss comments received on the draft housing element and the draft responses. And so staff has provided you with all the comments that were added to the housing element website under the chapters. And then we also provided you with all the written comments received. And then at the last meeting that you held, sorry, my dog is going crazy in the background. At the last meeting, Mr. Holmes had come and made a bunch of comments and you were interested in having him submit written comments. So he submitted written comments to me and we made a red line version of the document with all of his comments. And so all of those are part of the public comments that the city received on the first draft of the housing element. So I proposed some responses to the comments. And then I was actually expecting EMC to prepare responses to the comments, but I think the only comments that were incorporated were some of the ones that I made to the document, because there was a number of comments that I don't think there wasn't a response, and they didn't do any sort of outline saying how things were responded to. So essentially the document with the red lines is on the website. Some of the comments that were recommended by Mr. Holmes were incorporated, some of them weren't. Some of the recommendations by other commenters were incorporated and some weren't. And what our hope is because we have the threat of litigation if we don't pass the housing element or adopt the housing element by the deadline at the end of the month. The city attorney would like us to try to get a draft to the state before the deadline so that it's indicating to them that we're moving towards getting it adopted. So the hope is to send this draft with some of the responses to comments to the state for their 90-day review. But in the meantime, if you wanted to spend more time looking at the comments and if there's other things that you think we should address or include or respond to, we could still do that and do other modifications to the document during this 90-day period, because we imagine that when we get a response back from the state, we're going to have to make other updates to the document. And then at that point, another draft will come to you for review. So the only thing that I'm asking of you tonight is if you did have any thoughts on the comments that were received or see something that you actually would want included or responded to, we're happy to take that information from you and then make additional updates to the document as we're in this waiting period for HCD to review and comment on the draft. So that's really all I have to say, unless you have any questions for me. And then what Andy was going to say, he can't be here tonight because he said his laptop screen broke before the meeting. He was going to say that, or some of the comments weren't incorporated, like some of Mr. Holmes's comments weren't incorporated because we're looking to see what HCD wants to see in the document. And I know there was some discussion about this at the last meeting, that you want it to be your document and not HCD's document, but where some things addressed affirmatively furthering fair housing or like farm worker housing, some of the things we just know they're looking for. And so the document
Oh, sure.
is going to address some of the things that we know they want to see. So, but we don't want it to, I just don't want you to think that this is like the final draft. There's always opportunity to incorporate more comments or amend things that are in there.
So
I'm going
Elise,
to conclude with that and mute so you don't have to listen to my dog bark.
so that's okay. So could we get into kind of an understanding of what you would anticipate happening if we were to do it the way we ought to in order to get HCD not to reject what we submit? So do you need an updated draft that would be submitted, say, by what, February 15th or something like that? You tell us.
Well, no, I mean, so the draft that we have a draft posted on the internet right now that incorporated some of the
Correct.
comments. That's the
Right.
draft that will go to HCD. And then they'll be reviewing
Okay.
it for the next 90 days. But in that meantime, you can submit additional comments to us. The public can submit additional comments to us, and that will make it into the next draft that we're expecting to give to them sometime after that 90-day period.
Okay, so we'll actually, that additional 90 days is a lot of time, so that's good. So we
Yeah, it's a lot of
will be
time.
able to take advantage. We'll be able to take advantage of that 90-day period, and then the public will as well, in order to submit any additional comments.
Right. And I have to
on the
say
document.
it has been pretty rushed to try to turn this around in order to get it out to the state.
Yeah.
So I think it would be good to take that 90 days to really read through the document and come up with any additional comments or
Yeah.
additions.
I mean, it's just it's too long and detailed a document to just do it any other way. So
Yeah.
I think that's wise.
Do we have to respond to the YIMBY letter, legal threat letter?
You don't. The city council will be discussing probably the correspondence themselves, but this group doesn't need to respond, and the city manager and city attorney are, I guess I would say, will respond or address the letter.
It sounds
And
like
everyone else, we understand that everyone else who hasn't submitted a draft to the state received the same letter.
oh.
So we're not the only community that received that.
Do we have any idea what other cities have not yet submitted their draft? I know Madera has.
Yeah, it's like in Marin, San Anselmo is getting ready to submit their draft. Cormadera has submitted the draft, and I think they received comments. I'm not really sure. Mill Valley, I thought, received comments back. The county of Marin received comments back already. Novato has, I don't believe Novato has. I think Fairfax has. San Rafael, sorry, I don't
Fairfax
actually.
has,
We were
yeah.
just talking about this at a meeting of the planning directors, and there was definitely others that have not. And no, there will be some communities trying to adopt before the deadline, but there are also some communities that are planning to adopt before HCD reviews it, which itself is somewhat risky because we're required to have HCD review it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Why would they do that?
To put them in a better position so that they don't get sued, and to there's the builder's remedy. I don't know if you read about it, the Marin IJ, but in Southern California cities, there's a provision of state law that allows someone to come in if you don't have the housing element adopted by the deadline and propose projects that don't comply with the general plan.
Yeah.
So there's that risk is true. I don't see that it's that big of a risk for Larkspur because we don't have a lot of sites to develop, nor do we have, we have a lot of local property owners that aren't looking to try to take advantage
Right.
of the city.
I don't think that's something we have to worry about.
Do you, just out of curiosity, do you know how many ADUs have been approved since?
I do have a list,
We
not
just
very many.
approved one recently, so.
Oh, so I guess approval is different. So we've approved, I can get you the number. Why don't I get back to you with the actual number? Because we're going to be preparing a report and the planning commission will see it too.
Okay.
We're preparing the annual report on the general plan, which will be at your next planning commission meeting. And that will have the numbers of exactly how many ADUs have been approved.
Yeah.
But there have been definitely more this past year, but overall we haven't been approving all that many.
One thing that I did notice in reading these letters, which were pretty interesting, did Andy at all talk about live work spaces, or is that?
We have live work. So live work is possible in almost every district right now. So there's nothing that precludes that type of use. And then it's even allowed in the industrial district where other residential housing isn't allowed.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the industrial areas that we have that, would that potentially be sometime in the future housing possibilities in a live work sense?
Yeah, so the current zoning allows for live work on those sites. And then we just don't know of anyone who might be coming in the next 8 years to include it on the housing element. Some of the commercial sites we think are staying commercial sites.
Okay, thanks. So what do we need to do tonight?
So can I just get it clear, just a follow up really on that, on Brock's question about the YIMBY letter. So that's a very overt threat of litigation. And, technically but they're telling us if we don't do it their way, we're subject to litigation. So that obviously needs to be responded to, as you've suggested, by our city attorney. Do you have a kind of a time frame and how that is going to happen? Will we have a closed session to review that, or have we talked about that internally?
I think you're having a closed session at the next meeting
for this purpose.
City council meeting.
And I'm only hesitant because I'm assuming that's public knowledge but I really don't know how much I could disclose about that.
Yeah. Okay. Then that's fine. I'm just trying to understand the process here because.
So I believe it's coming to you soon.
Reading it didn't leave a lot of room for maneuvering. It was, get it done or get sued.
That's as a lawyer myself, I wouldn't put too much stock into it. I mean, I don't want to belittle these folks, but I'm mindful of the process that we've been doing on the rent control process, where we've had lawyers representing certain parties come up and threaten litigation, and we have made it clear that kind of approach is not well received by us. So I think the same kind of response will be appropriate for this, and I would expect that would be along the lines of what
good
city attorney would write.
And with the draft to the state, hopefully soon, the hope would be that in 90 days, if we could turn around comments quickly, it'll be before the planning commission and city council quickly. So it's not as if the city won't be adopting it anytime soon. It will happen the first quarter or the second quarter of this year.
There is no way in the world a private party like the YIMBY group is going to sue anybody while this stuff is still in the middle of an administrative process before HCD. That a court would laugh them out. So they could try it, but that is just not going to get them anywhere, except for maybe sanctions.
Thanks.
So I don't have any requests from you about this tonight because you had so little time to read those comments, but I'm also welcome to take your comments on that and under consideration, and we can work them into the next draft. And then also if you wanted to open it for anyone in the public to see if anyone has any comments on this item before you move on.
So on that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Brock. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask Elise if you were mentioning James Holmes. Are you talking about what he said at the planning commission meeting? Are you getting it written down or?
No, at the last housing steering committee meeting, he came with a lot of comments the time that it was partially in person.
Right. Yeah.
And so he gave me all his comments in writing on the whole housing element. And so we have a red line draft that was attached to those comment letters. And if it's not attached, I could attach it, but he thoroughly reviewed the whole document and there's a lot of recommended changes.
So the general plan, the diatribe on the general plan was
that was a whole different document that he could redline.
So Elise, just kind of logistically, as this group is going through considering further comments to submit to you, um, would it be easier for you? It might be easier for us if we just took the red line that you have now posted on the website and then just go through and make suggested changes with comments and things like that added to it, which you can accept or reject through, the Word program.
I think I might only have PDFs of the latest draft. I might only have PDFs, but I would expect EMC will give me that. But I think it's really useful to get comments that way because it just makes it that much easier to incorporate.
Yeah, it's easier. It's easier for me, for example, if I have a comment on something and I have
Just
in
to make
mind
it.
language that I think might be responsive to the comment that
Yes.
I have. It's a lot easier just to type that in, put a comment in saying, here it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's a
and
problem with that. So when I get the latest Word versions, I'd be happy to share it that you could do that.
Yeah, that would
that'd be
great.
really helpful.
Yeah.
And then we do have 3 people, including Mr. Holmes, in the audience. And so if anyone would like to comment on the comment letter item, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, we will move on to the next item. I don't see any hands raised, so we could move on. And the next item is to discuss the objective design and development standards for multifamily development. Oh, Mr. Holmes raised his hand. I'm going to call on you, Mr. Holmes. You could unmute and speak. Just go ahead.
Hello, James Holmes. Yes, I would like to thank the planning director for providing a comprehensive opportunity to provide submittals. I really appreciate that. Candidly, I have not had a chance to look at the latest draft. I guess I should have looked at the website. What I did was look at the agenda and thinking maybe there would have been a staff report or something. I didn't see anything there, so I did not see the latest draft. But I will make an effort to look at the latest draft. But I very much appreciate the planning director's opportunity that she gave me, and undoubtedly her patience in. It's a very long. It's a long draft, and I provided a number of comments, and I don't know if I don't know how clear they were, but I appreciate her patience and indulgence. So. Thank you very much. I'm glad that we all have an additional opportunity to respond to it. At the Planning Commission, I provided a number of comments relating to the EIR, which relates to this. To the housing element, and to make a long story short, I felt that the EIR understated the impact of the housing element. So I think at some point, I hope that that this committee will review the EIR and will also take comments on the EIR, because I think there are a number of comments in the EIR which I think will strike a number of reviewers as not necessarily consistent with the extent of the changes that are possible as a result of the housing element. Thank you.
I think that's probably right. And James, this is Kevin. Just for my own personal benefit, I want to thank you for your continued diligence in reviewing these documents. You've been at it forever, and I want you to know, at least from my perspective, and I think probably from everybody else on this call's perspective, they are welcome and appreciated.
No, I very much appreciate that. It's my honor and pleasure to help the community. I guess the one point that I would make with regard to both the EIR and, as I think I made with respect to the housing element itself, is that I really do consider, or I would urge the committee and the council to consider our appeal, the statements made in our appeal, as what I would call the reality check against which every other document should be reviewed, to make sure that it is that the substance of that document is consistent with the representations that we made in our appeal. So at a later date, when the law allows us more flexibility to address some of the concerns that we raised in the appeal, we will not have a situation where the YIMBY people or any agency can point to either the EIR or representations in the housing element itself and say, well, what are you talking about? You said it wasn't a
Right.
problem.
We can incorporate all that stuff by reference without repeating it, I'm sure. So, but I agree that it's important to keep that record preserved.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay,
wanna move
that's
to
it for
the
public
standards?
comment. So let's go back to item 3, which is, item 4, objective design and development standards for multifamily developments. Receive presentation on application of the standards to certain existing development and discuss. So I'm going to turn this over to our consultants, David and Ryan, to show you what they've worked on since our last meeting on this topic.
Good, thanks. Welcome, Dave.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. And again, I'm David, and I have Ryan Call from Urban Field Studio as well. And we thought today would be a great opportunity to give a little test drive to the odds for your benefit to better understand how it works and how it could work. So I think this will be a good way to get feedback from everybody as we move forward through the process.
And then for the benefit of the call-in person, if you could send me this presentation after the meeting, then I could get it printed out so he could view it at the library. That'd be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, great. So tonight we just went over some of the housing element information, and then we're going to talk about the odds a little further through the application of case studies, because case studies are very revealing sort of in how the odds will understand existing projects within the city of Larkspur and how it would be applied to those projects. And one of the things that Andy Flower can't be here tonight because he dropped his computer right before the meeting. But one of the things that he wanted to emphasize in terms of just general schedule is his hope was that we could get through the odds process and get it approved, hopefully before the time that you get the first round of comments from HCD. The thinking behind that is when you return those set of comments around to HCD saying that you have an adopted odds, will really help show that you're at a higher level of substantial compliance. So that was kind of his selling point. So where we are right now, we started this process back in June of 22. We reviewed the zones and then came back to you and discussed the sites. And then back in October, we provided the first draft, I think, which was a rough cut over what we think is the best approach for Larkspur. And we, through that process, we're really looking for comments from the committee. We'd like you to look through the draft and comment directly on it, however works best for you, because we need to get in kind of that nitty gritty to really understand, to get your feedback so we can really understand how best to shape this document. So we're hoping that maybe in the next 2 weeks or so, we can get the final comments from the committee, and then we can move forward with a revised draft that will go out. If we can follow that schedule, we hopefully can get a revised draft out for late February when we meet with you again, and we can get your comments again, and then we will reincorporate those, and then they'll go through Planning Commission and Council for adoption. So I think we'll have to see how the process plays out and see what the comments are, but that would be the ideal, sort of the ideal course of action.
So David, just really quickly, would that be an update on the February 2021 binder I've got, or is there
the updated the version that is current is the October 10th draft?
Okay.
2022.
I have November 2nd. Is that the same?
Is it?
I have a November 2nd, 2022.
Oh no, I think you are
or
right.
November 3rd.
I think you are right. For some reason I had it saved in that folder.
I don't think I.
And if anyone needs a a hard copy, please just let me know and I have some extras at the office and I can print one out.
Please put me down on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
take comments, we'll take markups, red lines, however you want to deliver them. I think it'd be really helpful. I mean, you know, as Ryan and I kind of said all along, you know Larkspur best, and you are in the best position to provide comments so that these odds can direct development in a positive way that still allows for housing, but allows for it in a way that benefits Larkspur architecturally and aesthetically, you know, to maintain the look and feel of why people treasure living there. So the original one that we were working on, you know, was broken down kind of from the big topics, from the zones down to the small. And as we discussed in previous meetings, we're essentially doing a similar format. It's just we've stripped out the architectural styles section and the typology section. So that really is form-based zoning that's based on envelope and setbacks. So because when you're driving around a city, the effect of what you see really isn't about the architectural style as much as it is about the masses and where the masses are in relationship to the road, how dense they are, how tall they are. Those are things that we really want to address and find a way to address them in a way that will actually result, hopefully, in some beneficial housing in the future. This is a map of the zones that we've been talking about, and this is the document that shows up essentially in the draft that you have, with one exception. The outlined sites in purple are housing element selected sites. So those are sites that currently exist in the housing element. We have a number of them near the old downtown core, obviously a number of them near Larkspur Landing, and then a few other large sites and other sites in other locations. Yeah, I think it's pretty good distribution. And I think as we talk tonight about how the odds are applied to properties, you know, I think it'll help all of us envision better how the housing element sites could be envisioned in the future. So our overall effort so far, we took the original document from 360 pages down to 162 pages, hopefully more manageable for city staff to handle in terms of reviewing things. We've gone to great lengths to design it to reflect the uniqueness of Larkspur. It no longer is this generic Marin document that Opticos had created originally. It's a document that is steeped in careful consideration in the built form, setbacks, and massing that exist in your city. Larkspur is a very diverse city architecturally. You have, you know, a lot of people think of the downtown as kind of what Larkspur is, but when you look around Larkspur, there's such a great variety. And I think, you know, one of the fun things about doing this for us is trying to encompass all of that variety and try to create odds that will, you know, allow positive things to happen while doing our best to make sure that we direct development that's not as beneficial to Larkspur away. And then like I mentioned, we've removed the style chapter, and we have largely removed any commercial requirements. You know, commercial buildings are governed by your existing zoning. The odds are designed for multifamily residential. They are not designed to govern single family residential or commercial properties.
Right.
So with that, I want to hand it off to Ryan, and Ryan's going to walk through some case studies of some projects that you all probably are very familiar with. Ryan?
Great, thanks, David. So, you know, essentially tonight, we're not going to go over the detail of the odds. We did that in our last presentation. I will do a brief reminder of the different criteria that the sites are judged by. But essentially, this is to give you kind of a flavor for how the odds are applied to a project, so that when you go through the odds over the next couple of weeks, you will have just a little more context and background to give us feedback. The draft that's out from November is fairly rough, but we're intending to do a pretty in-depth you know, review and refinement of those odds once we have your comments. So tonight we'll talk about the form and mass that David mentioned a little bit, and how those controls apply to projects, our sample projects. And then David will also speak to some of the materiality a little bit. The testing through the case studies essentially allows us to kind of test our odds categories. And through that process, we have identified some areas where we can tighten up the language in our odds, or we can expand the criteria or modify the criteria. So next slide, David. So this is just a quick reference for the next slide. You're going to see the kind of steps to getting through our odds start with frontages. We define, what's primary, which is the street facing. Typically, if you're on a corner site, you have a primary, secondary frontage. If you're on, and then you have interior frontages and rear frontages. So frontages tell us how to assign the setbacks that are listed in the odds to our project. The next part of it is design site size. And this was an idea that came out of the original odds from Opticos. And essentially, when you have a large site, you are required to break it down if it's bigger than a certain threshold into basically smaller sites so that you preserve a fine-grained character of development. Building height, setbacks, encroachments, parking, building massing, accessory buildings. Each one of these has a little section for each zoning overlay in the odds draft that we prepared for you to take a look at. The three examples that we're looking at tonight are all under the T4 zoning, which is your downtown, and which is also the most fine-grained and most sensitive. So that's where we wanted to be very careful about this process. So next slide. So our first example is 30 Locust Avenue. This is just one block off Magnolia. It is, an interesting development in that it is on a microscopic site for downtown. And, they've actually provided a lot of housing units for the parcel that they're on. And this is a project that would be somewhat difficult to approve under our current odds or under the current draft odds that we have. So I'll run through what's compliant, I'll run through what's not compliant, and then also how this is some considerations on how to improve our odds that we have. So first thing, the design site size. This is a really narrow site. I think it was a 50 by 125 foot lot. So that's consistent with the design site size that are allowed. Building height, it's fairly low rise for a 3-story building. So the 30 foot is in compliance. It's compliant with the primary setbacks for an urban area. It's compliant with the encroachments because it really doesn't have any parts of the building that go beyond the property line or setbacks. The building mass and length and width, just those rough dimensions, it is compliant. It is also compliant in that in a quantitative way, they provided enough private open space for each unit. The challenge is it's not quite deep enough. We have a 6-foot minimum requirement. They're in at 5. Now, there are a few more things that are not compliant than there are that are compliant. Number one, the primary frontage has no glazing, no transparency whatsoever, unless you count the airspace between the storage and the second level of the building. And that doesn't count. It needs to be a glass material. The rear setback, this building's only about, 7 feet off the rear property line. So it's not in compliance with the rear setback requirement of 20 feet. Parking is also not allowed within 30 feet of the frontage, the primary frontage. And we do this so that there is an active ground level program that's bringing life to the street instead of a parking garage. There's no shared or common area open space that has a minimum depth of 10 feet. The sidewalk area, which really doesn't count along the north side, is only 6 feet 8. From a materiality point of view, it is primarily stucco, and it does not have a juxtaposition of different materials for visual interest. It does not have the finer grain material modules that we specify. So, this is a project that clearly wasn't written for these odds. It was written for a different era. It was designed for a different era, and it's somewhat minimal in nature. Potential refinements, though, lessons learned, and I'll go through this in more of a summary, but essentially, one thing we could add to the odds is having a minimum criteria for glazing on a primary facing facade and also secondary where a facade faces a side street. adding a criteria for active program along the primary frontage. I think we can tighten up our language there to make sure that it's not a storage, room or something like that, or garage, of course. And then adding a criteria to break the long horizontal massing, because that is one characteristic. Even though this is a very, very small building, the monotony of that long flat roof is working against it. And actually, one part of the materiality section in our odds is a provision to require variety in the roof. So we'll be adding that. Next slide, David. So case study 2, and we can go back to these in the discussion and go through them, but this is a fairly recently built project. It consists of live work units at the front and then just residential projects in the back. This project went through a couple of phases. This is the approved study. We've also done an analysis on the previous version of it, just to kind of compare the two, because they're quite different in the projects. So this site here is in compliance on the design site size. And we set our design site size based on measuring the parcels that are predominant in your city for each zoning overlay. So it's consistent with that. The building height, it's under 45. It's compliant. It actually exceeds compliance with most of its setbacks or all of its setbacks. It's compliant with encroachments because it doesn't have any. The building mass, length, and width are very much in compliance, except for accessory buildings are, if you count the rear buildings as accessory buildings, they are larger than what we allow. It's compliant in the parking spaces per current odds. Where it's not compliant, and this will be an interesting thing, I think, for all of us to discuss tonight, is in our odds, we are requiring an industry standard on the retail ceiling height. And what we have here, and actually what was also done in the San Rafael project we'll be looking at, is the ceiling heights are almost a residential scale. So they're quite low. How this impacts your downtown is that it limits somewhat the appeal to certain tenants to occupy those spaces. They work for small boutique fashion or small cafe, but anything like a food service or something of a larger mechanical needs, it's going to struggle. The material diversity, we require a minimum of 2 materials. This would be subject to debate a little bit. When you look at this building, it has, but it's predominantly wood with wood trim. The potential refinements to our odds is we want to make sure that our odds are real clear about how many primary buildings we allow per each site, and that will be a function of how much frontage. And then if we allow primary massing at the scale of the buildings in the back, that may be a function of maybe a very deep lot. The accessory buildings, if we count the buildings, any building off the primary frontage, if it's in the back, if we decide to go that route, then we should consider, or we could consider increasing that size. So a project like this could happen because this is a nice project for the downtown. Potential refinements to the odds, making sure that we really have enough space between buildings. And then do we want to consider lowering the height requirement for retail space when the square footage is less than 1,000 square feet? And that's what we have in these examples, is very, very small retail spaces, which likely aren't going to be food service. And, do we need to force that somewhat the expense and the extra building height to have more of a standard retail unit? So that's something we want to discuss with you as we get through this. Next slide, David. So this was the previous project, and from a compliance, the design site, the building height, the compliance with setbacks, encroachments, these things were all the same. Building mass, length, and width was in compliance. The private open space per unit was met, parking spaces. So this was a project that fit very well because it's only 2 stories in the front and it's 3 stories in the back, but the grade raises up. So it's kind of like 2.5 stories. The material diversity was there, had a stone base with a stucco second floor. Some of the non-compliance issues were common with the built example, which is the retail space is too low. And then we also have, and this is where the built project's also non-compliance. The odds as they're written have a pretty aggressive, or I'll say very aggressive requirement that 75% of your facade between the finished floor and the ceiling of the retail space is glazing. And what we did is we took these projects into AutoCAD and we analyzed what their transparency was. And we think that number might be a little high and that this 55% number might actually be pretty good. The distance between our accessory buildings in this plan, there were pinch points on each of the 3 buildings that are in the back that got down to 5 feet between the buildings. We require at the upper level, like a second level of any accessory building, that there's a minimum of 10 feet of distance. Considerations, one advantage that this project took advantage, or this design took advantage of, is that there's no rear setback essentially with the parking garage. And so by pushing that parking garage, you can all the way to the property line, or almost all the way to the property line. I think it's 5 feet off. You get more parking. It's largely underground and doesn't visually impact the neighbors or anything. So one consideration we may want to take, that in a very urban area at the first level, we can have more parking by extending that parking to the setback, as long as the residential on the upper level is set back. Potential refinements to the odds is, again, let's think about also lowering the retail height requirements for very small retail spaces. Next slide, David. This example, very recently built, and I think in a lot of ways, architecturally, a really nice project. And this is in San Rafael. It's not really in the absolute heart of their commercial district, but it's on the north end. And it's a very nice building. It's for its height, it's within your height compliance. It's a 3-story building. It has retail on the first level on just the corner. So let's go through this one. Design site size, it's 75 by 100, so it's in compliance. The building height's under 45 feet. The compliance with primary and interior setbacks are there. The secondary setback, which is the side street, was 4 inches off, but it pretty much, they added 5 feet of basically depth to the sidewalk to, they were 4 feet 8, so it's very close. The building mass, length, and width was in compliance. The private open space per unit was compliant. These are townhome units, which are really interesting. And so on the second level, they have a recessed balcony. On the third level, they have a recessed kind of porch balcony. On the second level, which is the first level of their unit, they have projecting balconies that are 5-foot projections. There's an absence of shared open space, which is, probably more in common with a lot of the older urban buildings versus more modern suburban buildings. The private open space, it's mostly in compliance, except that it was 1 foot too narrow. It was 5 feet deep on the projecting balconies. An interesting thing for, I think, us to talk about tonight too, is this site backs up onto another commercial site. And I think where we have a rear setback that backs up onto a residential area, perhaps we stick with a 20-foot setback. But where we have a commercial property that backs up onto another commercial zoning or property, perhaps we can reduce that setback to a 10-foot example, which is what this project did. Private open space, let's see what else. So also the other issue that's not in compliant on this is they did a very nice job of hiding their parking. Their parking is on the grade level, and you access it from the back. and then it wraps around to the side of the building. But what it did is it took half of the Main Street frontage, the primary frontage, and it's essentially, there's some windows, but there's just parking behind it. So it's an inactive facade. In your downtown, which is much, much smaller, I would not recommend this, and I would hold that the limited storefront space that you have be occupied by commercial activity on Magnolia Avenue. See, so consider, all right. So here it's reduce the rear setback to 10 at the upper levels, and then consider an option to eliminate shared open space in lieu for more private open space. So we could write a criteria that says, if you decide to opt out of shared common open space, then you need to provide an increase in the private open space. And this building exceeded the private open space requirement by having both a first and second level, or I'm sorry, second and third level private open space. So next slide, David. So just a quick recap on kind of some of the lessons learned is getting some more specificity into our zoning that says that outside of Magnolia Avenue, retail frontage is optional in the T4 SMS area. And it doesn't make sense, like on Locust Street, for instance, to have retail. But we want to make sure that it stays on Magnolia. Specified glazing systems must compose a minimum of 25% of primary and secondary facade frontages, measured as a percentage of the facade. So basically, we want to require that you have to have glazing doors on your primary facade so that a project like Locust could not be built the way it was. Add criteria to offset the building plane by no less than 18 inches for a length of no less than 30% of the facade length. So essentially, you've got your facade length, and we limit the length of that facade in our massing criteria. But this additional criteria would require that the building have an offset of 18 inches for 30% of the plane in that length of facade. And that's based on what we saw on the 1700 4th Street project in San Rafael. There's a nice little spot where they bump about 2/3 of the building out 18 inches to kind of create a nice scale. The shared open space, is really challenging on the size of lots that you have in your downtown. So there's a suggestion here to add criteria that says if you are under 7,500 square feet, then no common open area is required. For lots between 7,500 and 15,000, like the one in San Rafael, the common space may be met by providing 100 square feet of private open space per unit. And that's unless they want to provide the common shared open space. And then add criteria that visually or physically separates the private open space of individual units. So interestingly, on the 30 Locust Street, the private open space isn't that private. You can pretty much look right at your neighbor at any moment in their private open space. So that would something that we could improve.
It's not open space. It's not open space at all.
You mean on the right? So let's go to the next slide.
Could I ask? I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I ask for a real basic question? Can you give me a quick and dirty definition of glazing system?
Sure. So a glazing system includes the like when you specify a window system for a building, it will come with the jamb, the sill, the head, the trim, and the stiles around the glass itself, and then the glass itself. And so when we calculate the glazing component, we want to include those other elements that aren't necessarily glazing, but they're part of that glazing system. And I think what we have to be careful of is when you only count the glass itself, developers will go towards a product that don't have much expression or that
Right.
they might be biased towards product that doesn't have much expression of the trim and the sills and all that stuff. So we don't want to inadvertently discourage kind of a traditional architecture in that provision. Does that help?
Right, but that's, yeah, it does help quite a lot. I understand there's a balance that has to be struck between the different elements of a glazing system. I guess the reason I asked the question, and you led me to think I know what the answer is, but if there's a requirement along you've suggested here, a minimum 50%, blah blah blah, for glazing systems. Does that mean the developer has a lot of flexibility to kind of minimize the window component of that system and maximize other elements of the system? So it kind of, you could have a compliant glazing system installed on a property, but the actual view that a tenant is going to have out of the window is small because the window is going to be small.
So
Does that
where
make sense
that,
with that?
I understand where you're going. There's a lot of suburban housing where basically they slap 2x4s around the window, to it kind of enhance the expression of the window, but it didn't add any more transparency to it.
Yeah,
And so
there's a lot of that.
that would not count. Really it's where essentially like in an aluminum storefront system, you have 1.5 to 2 inches of frame. So that becomes the outside of that frame becomes where you start your measurement, and then you include everything in between. For a wood sash window, you would include up to the point where either the exterior applied trim or finish stops and where the window starts. So that would be inside, that. So, they could specify windows that have a very historic look where you would have less glass for the window area. But I think it's pretty minor. I think, but we won't include the trim. That would be a way they could use to cheat the system, and I don't think, we want to avoid that.
And I guess that's where I'm getting, because it looks like there are opportunities to, as you say, cheat the system. And I want to make sure that what we adopt ultimately is something that really does make sense in terms of the exterior aesthetic, as well as, the benefits that a tenant or an occupant is going to get by, having windows.
Yeah. And I think the glossary, and we'll find a great spot to have that in the book so that's very clear, so that when your staff is doing ministerial review, they'll be able to point and say, this is how you need to go and measure your windows, or how we measure the windows on the drawings. And it's high in my mind because I just 2 years ago finished a project in Bloomington, Indiana that had extremely comprehensive odds. And they require only the glass. You can only measure the glass. That's it. The transparency means glass only. So the architect had to go through and account for every pane of glass, in the project, come up. But it also incentivized the architect to find very minimalist looks, to the architecture. So I don't think that's right for Larkspur. And so I think we can avoid that mistake that I think was in their odds. Let's see. Now, David, this one also covers the 1700 4th Street. So, all right. So make sure I just have gone through all of these. The grade level retail height for space less than 1,000. The pro on that is you get a lower building. The con on that is that some tenants really need that interstitial space between the structure and the ceiling to run robust mechanical, and you won't get that with those low ceilings like on the San Rafael project and the Magnolia project. So it limits the type of tenant that you can have in your downtown district. And that thinking, I definitely wouldn't change our requirement for the 15-foot clear underside of structure that's in the T5 zoning. because those are larger sites and they're largely in more commercial districts like the vicinity around the mall. But in the T4, the scale of your buildings is so fine grained, and a lot of your existing retail is lower than the national standard. So that would be good to get your thoughts on. Now, the other one here is structured podium parking to occupy the rear setback if it's abutting another commercial use. When we studied the 1700 4th Street project, that gave them a real advantage to get parking into a tight urban site. They set back the townhomes 10 feet on the second level and gave those people a nice private balcony, or not balcony, but porch space. So, that's a consideration. And then consider making shared open space optional if the private open space is increased. It's kind of a flexibility approach where if somebody has a very tight urban site, which most of your lots are quite small in the downtown, it gives them a few more options to solve the puzzle of getting program and building to fit in a tight site and still pencil. And then consider increasing the maximum size of an accessory building. That's a consideration based off the 285 Magnolia project. Under our current odds, the previous iteration would have been more favorable than the one that they landed with, which had 3 smaller buildings in the back versus 2 more primary sized buildings in the back. So I think, David, that kind of covers our analysis. And but now we want to encourage discussion tonight, but also the next 2 weeks are really, really, really important for, I think, for your team to familiarize yourself with the current form of the draft, this presentation, and then getting back to us as much information as possible so that we can take a really thorough run at refining the language or the diagrams or the exhibits or the criteria in the odds. So Elise, I think we can open up for discussion or questions.
Yep.
We do have a comment or hand raised by Mr. Riley Hurd. If you would like to take that now, I'll allow you to talk. Go ahead, Mr. Hurd.
Good evening, committee members, everyone. My name is Riley Hurd. I'm a local land use attorney. I'm following every housing element and odds process within Marin. Just a few things just watching here based on my observations. First of all, I did the project in San Rafael that was just used as the example. So I'm intimately familiar with that one. That was from kind of before the waivers, concessions, things took off. But people seem to like it. So here are my thoughts in no particular order. One, you guys are getting an incredible service from ELS, and the fact that they are doing test cases and refining the documents. I wish they were in every jurisdiction. So a lot of places blindly adopted the Opticos document as presented, and I can report to you that it does not work at all, ever. And all we do is just go state density bonus and seek waivers from it because it doesn't function. Okay, so these refinements are critical. The next thing I want to point out, which, the state put us in this corner, right? You can only use objective standards. So what does everybody turn to? Because it's really the only thing you can do, a form-based code. But take a look at the examples tonight. Not one of those projects fit the code, and it was in many categories. And I'd put a lunch on the fact that there is not a single building in Larkspur that fits the form-based code in every category. Not one. And so people need to kind of understand that, and B, and this is probably the most important part, there's got to be some type of escape hatch or flexibility that is built in to accommodate that fact. Now, the problem that we get is the way we used to do that. It was to say, oh, well, you know, if it's minor and it's insubstantial, the planning director can handle that. Well, those are subjective terms, right? So illegal. What do we do? That's probably something I need to think about. But because, well, I'll give you an anecdote. A different project in San Rafael under the form-based code prepared by Opticos. My client instructed the architect and he said, I want to do a project with no concessions or waivers. Kind of out of interest, right? And the architect comes back 2.5 months later and says, there is no functional building that will meet every single criteria in the form-based code. We had no choice but to apply for a waiver. And then once we did one, we just started doing more because now, you know, we didn't have the benefit of strictly complying with the form-based code. So somehow accounting for that fact, and I'm not sure David and Ryan would disagree with the fact that the development of a form-based code that truly fit every scenario, you know, that could be 2,000 pages long. And it probably still wouldn't work. So the goal in drafting these things is getting them as good as you can, as flexible as you can, to minimize the waiver and concession requests. And, you know, I always think about people say, oh, I want to preserve the character of how Marin looks today. You know, I love Mill Valley as it is. You couldn't develop 80% of Mill Valley under the new building codes, street widths, fire hazard, same with Larkspur, right? Like, so I think we just need to be transparent about that and understand that no odds will be perfect. And if there is any way to build in that flexibility, you could help people who want to do a fully compliant project. Final comment, just on the ones that I always have to get waivers from. First floor plate heights, downtown Magnolia, yes, I get it. Anywhere else, we're not doing any commercial, not doing retail. First floor plate heights have got to be low, okay? Because we waive that one every time. And the other thing is upper story step backs. It's everybody's crutch for bulk and mass, and it's the way to, you know, give me a wedding cake. We waive it every time. And the reason is the buildings don't line up. So when you get taller, now your elevators are offset, your stairwells are offset, your plumbing is offset. You're either building a whole new set, which is financially infeasible, or you go for the waiver. But there's all these awesome other architectural tools to reduce bulk and mass at the upper levels, one of which we proposed at the Fireman's Fund site just the other night at the Novato DRC, and they were blown away by it. It looked really great, and it wasn't as simple as, hey, when you get to 30 feet, go back 10 feet, you know, because it doesn't work. So I thought it would be helpful to just share a few anecdotes and experience, and I will send examples to the staff of that one we did for Fireman's Fund. But really great job, and thank you for all the hard work you guys are doing.
Can I ask you a couple questions, Mr. Hurd? I appreciate what you were saying.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, on the one hand, I think you were paying the team off by saying it's, you know, not cookie cutter, and also saying that what we've come up with, even buildings like, you know, the Lark or, you know, the left building, they couldn't be built to those standards, and so everything's going to go to waivers. I'm not sure what, you know, what recommendation you had.
Oh, this is the part where the state has jammed us up, right? Your choice is objective standards or no standards. So my recommendation is it's not to have no standards. That's not going to fly. So it's just to make the objective standards as flexible as possible and try to find a arguably objective escape hatch for these things. But you know, every time there's been a lawsuit that's gone to court over the RHNA, the objective standards, the judges say the same thing. If you don't like it, vote for someone else. We're just applying the law. So yeah, we got jammed up by only being able to use objective standards. The days of is it harmonious, bulk and mass, those are gone. But obviously that didn't produce any housing. You know, you look at the letter from the Greenbelt Alliance in your packet tonight, and they say, hey, are you aware that the average unit production per year in the city of Larkspur is 3? That's not gonna work. And then, you know, you don't produce your RHNA, you're subject to SB 35, all the other tools that are out there. So yeah, we got put in this corner.
Yeah, that's life, that we're going to have to deal with that. And I do want to echo, this is Kevin, I do want to echo the comments and the compliments that you gave to our consulting team on putting together what they have done for these objective design standards. You know, we didn't really get into the nuances of what they were proposing aesthetically, but from prior presentations, I think generally this group was pretty receptive to what they had put together, and I'm hoping we'll have flexibility, but I understand exactly what you're saying. I just want to make sure that the hard effort that our consultants have put into this process is acknowledged, because it really has been good.
To apply it to specific buildings and then update it after seeing how that works, there's not another city that's done that. It's just incredible. So I completely agree. Great job.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will say, thank you, Riley. Those are really good thoughts. I will say that as part of the odds, we have a section for adjustments to standards. So if you have an atypical condition in terms of a setback or a tree or a rock or something, you know, there are some things listed. I think I generally agree with Riley that it is challenging. I think with the Opticos odds, it's almost impossible because it is so specific, and we've tried to take away the style guidelines and the typologies, so it's a little more general. And I think through this process, something like the 285 Magnolia, you know, as we tweak this and allow for the lower ground floor and allow for less glazing. I mean, 75% glazing is just not realistic in any circumstance, you know, from floor to ceiling, unless you're at like an Apple store. So I think we can make those changes, and I think a project like that probably would become compliant under our odds. But I think Riley's point is good, in that every site is different, every condition, every project is different. It's hard to make objective guidelines that can cover every condition. You can't. So we're trying to take a step back from Opticos and not make it so specific, and we're trying to be more form-based instead of aesthetically driven.
Is my understanding that with objective design standards, you work within what you're allowed. It still gets submitted to the planning department, does it not? And they review it, and if they look at it and say you haven't done it, so you can go back and change it to meet the objective design standards, or you can apply for a waiver, in which case you would be heard before the planning commission or the city council or whatever. So the process is still there to have something that's outside of the norm, which is what the objective standards will become, is the norm. Is that not
some
true?
of it depends on what process the city puts in place. So you could make it just a staff decision and say people apply to the building department and the objective standards are applied, and the exceptions are objective, and so those are applied by staff as well. Or you could have something that goes to the planning commission, but the planning commission just has limited discretion to consider the waivers and the standards. So you can require a planning commission process still. There's ultimately, there's not going to be a lot of discretion though. So if someone was coming in with a project, they're entitled under state law to waivers of the standards because the city requires a certain percentage of affordable housing. And most people put that in instead of not putting that in. And also the developers are very aware that if they do put in the affordable housing, they could get waivers and concessions to standards and lower parking standards and other bonuses. So there's no discretion to those waivers. Like the city has to grant them if they meet some very minimal justification for them. The discretionary part that I was hoping for was that if someone didn't want to use the odds, if someone wanted to come in with their own design, that maybe there's an out that they could decide to go through our standard process of design review if they didn't want to follow the odds. And
I believe that's still open. I think that a developer can still choose to go through discretionary.
I think that's what I was trying to get at. Is
okay,
if you submitted something that's amazing, but it doesn't meet the objective design standards, and the planner, Elise, says, wow, okay, so you go before the planning commission or whatever. And they could then grant whatever it is, a variance, or I don't
so
know.
that would be the hope, is that there's an out, and I think Corte Madera offers that in theirs. If someone doesn't want to do the objective standards, they have the choice of going through the standard process. They don't get the benefit of the limited hearings, and
Yeah.
they still have, it might be multiple hearings, there might be rights to appeal and things like that.
Yeah, but isn't that the exception that kind of swallows the rule? I mean, if they can avoid, and I'm not saying that's a bad idea, because I like the planning commission. I wish everything could go through the planning commission. But
Thank you, Kevin.
if there are, no, well, I'm a former planning commissioner.
That's true.
If I worry about the tension between having the compliance standards out there, and Brock, you and I may think a particular design is the best thing since sliced bread, but that's a subjective assessment to some extent. And if we were able to have the planning commission assert what is essentially design review every time somebody comes and asks for it, I don't think we're going to fare well with ACD. Does that sound right to you, Riley?
They would always have the fallback to the objective standards.
That's what I'm
really,
saying.
Yeah, it's really the owner's choice if they want to go through that process. And
right,
I think
but
that
if we approve a project based upon what we think is better than the objective standards, because we think it's better, then where are we? I mean, we've basically said if nobody wants to apply the objective standards because we all agree there's a better design that an architect has put together. Are we going to get in trouble from HCD because we're not applying objective standards? We could issue a variance for every project that way.
But realistically,
I'm more worried about neighbors coming in and saying, look, you have this objective standard that it has to meet X, and this person isn't complying. Like, it'll be frustrating to people who are looking at the standards that they think everyone's going to follow, and here's a project coming in that doesn't meet them. So I think it'll go both ways.
I think you'd also have to have a completely politically insulated planning commission to do something like that, because the public puts pressure on folks because they know the pressure works. And so whether you independently think a project's great, the public and this has just been par for the course for the last 30 years, the public puts pressure, and the people in charge of approving projects back off on the approval. And this is why nothing got built for so many years. And so David and I had a mutual client that had a project 6 months into design, and odds were implemented, and we scrapped the previous design completely and designed something that met the odds. Now, just because they were so terrified of the neighbors and the NIMBY forces in the community. So, I think we want to have odds that are, reflective of how your city, what makes your city beautiful, and we've done our best to do that. I do think this idea of flexibility is really important, and we need to look at our odds with a really sharp eye again in this next round, and see where we can provide language. For instance, the floor plate. Being very specific about what happens on Magnolia Avenue, but providing optionality if it's not on Magnolia Avenue, things like that, so that somebody can find a project that pencils. And Larkspur is just packed with irregular sites and irregular
yeah.
conditions. That's what makes it beautiful, but that's also what makes it hard to apply odds.
And I think you've done a great job in putting together reasonable direction in the odds. And I think most people coming in would follow that, because then they don't have to deal with subjective design criteria or people that
I
have
think
their
that's
own
right.
ideas. But you might
think
have
that's right.
somebody who comes in and says, I want to do something really different, and I'm willing to go before a commission to see if they'll approve it. The commissions are open to the public. The public has the right to comment, but I don't think that's going to be the case most 90% of the time.
That's right.
Developers like
I think
certainty.
that's right.
And I think, the reason that we're
Yeah.
here is just the Bay Area in general has seen the weaponization of discretionary review to
Right.
stop projects, and it's very effective, and that's kind of why we're all here.
Well,
So
we
I
don't
think
do that. In
mu-
Larkspur, we give everybody a fair shake.
most developers like
Then we
certainty.
throw them out.
Yeah. David and Ryan, I wanted to, circle back and thank you guys. I think you really heard us loud and clear, about the, the three you gave, for me at least. I think that's what I was struggling with last time. And I kept using the, kind of flip phrase, show me the baby. And, so it's given us a chance to see stuff. And I have lots of little detailed questions, but I just wanted to first, thank you for that. And then I'm assuming that the reduction of the odds from, I think you said 360 to 160 pages will help the planning commission, because they still have to wade through this, and hopefully it'll incentivize, and I hope in that simplicity, it doesn't lose, for me, the big three, I'll restate, or that we've, somehow meaningfully incentivized affordable housing. And I'm not sure that's part of tonight's discussion. Two is that we don't get any hideous designs. And, I think you spent a lot of time talking about that. And then, kind of as a subset, really that the downtown area with its identity, is especially, not going to have something that would be completely incongruous or hideous. So, first and foremost, thank you. Let me just hit a couple small detail questions on the glazing. As we're walking through like a case, the glazing, is that sort of a gross, fenestration ratio? Or, could I, for example, just put a bunch of big sliding glass doors there and the glazing criterion? Or does it actually get into, some of the detailing, like the mullions and the styles and, and some of the other elements of fenestration?
No, it's more, again, this is that balance of getting so restrictive that you have, that somebody can't find a solution to their specific unit type or layout, et cetera. These are, and keep in mind that these odds are for residential or, residential projects with a little bit of retail or strictly residential. So there is kind of an inherent modularity to residential units where it is hard to do blankets of glass or, large areas of glass. But the way it's calculated, so for instance, I took the 1700 4th Street project. We were fortunate to have, thank you, Elise, really nice drawings for it. I put those into AutoCAD. I calculated the just area of glass system. So I included the, the edges of that frame that holds the glass. And then basically for the retail, which, is very important on Magnolia Avenue, I calculated between the finished floor and the ceiling how much transparency was in that zone. And on the two projects, or the two examples, the built and unbuilt version, the unbuilt version was 30%, and the built version, the unbuilt version was 55% glazing. They reduced it in the final built version down to like 30-something% on that ground level facing the street between the floor and the ceiling. So anyhow, but we don't get into the specificity saying that your windows and doors need to be a certain minimum width or height or things like that, because I think
that's where the original odds kind of went astray, and that they gave specific proportions for windows and mullions that you had to meet. And that level of specificity either results in waivers, or it results in your city looking like a cookie cutter repeat after one after another. So I mean, I would agree, there is a certain extent that, someone could do something that could conform with the odds that may not be great. And I think they could do something terrible with
I mean, just
odds,
specifically, what if we took 1,700 and went down to Home Depot and bought the cheapest sliding glass doors and put them in so that we had a 30 to 40%, ratio? I mean, it would be compliant, right?
It would be compliant to that. And, when you talk about materials, like you're talking about like the cheap materials, I think that's a real tricky thing, because you want to try to promote the best materials, but you don't want to eliminate the ability for someone to do an affordable housing project that's going to need the vinyl windows and need a lower cost. So it's a fine line, and trying to allow what you need so you can get the housing stock, but trying to push people to do something that's a little better.
What you're really talking about is window and door units. You buy a window unit, and so that's your glazing.
I like that language, Brock.
And then you put the trim on, and that's additional. But it's the window or door unit that we're talking about is the opening.
That's right.
I like that language.
David and Ryan, so I'm assuming this is T4 SMS that we were looking at?
Those were all T4 SMS, yeah.
And that would apply to downtown, and that would apply to North Magnolia. I mean, it's pretty much, I forget, you showed us the shaded colors, but it's not like the downtown has a more restrictive or, zoning. It's kind of sharing it with all the, similar, like, I forget what the descriptor was, something about urban, dense neighborhood, something like that.
So T4 SMS on the screen, it pops up in a few places where there's either precedence for some mixed use retail or potential for that to be successful. So, and a lot of this is built and it's not going to get rebuilt. For instance, the area behind Town and Country, that's mostly 4-story product back there. But yeah, but where I'm after this conversation that we've had tonight, I do want to make sure that our odds are, and they're not there yet, but they need to be crystal clear that the retail is mandatory on Magnolia. But in other areas, it doesn't. I don't think it's mandatory in other areas. Partly because retail in general is getting. There's just less of it. There's getting less built. It's harder to lease, and we don't want to end up with parts of town that just have continually empty storefronts. But we also need to make sure that ground floor has an active residential presence, so that projects like 30 Locust, don't show up everywhere, because that's the easy way to park a project.
Was wondering, the projects that you compared to the odds, they were all well under the limit that's in the odds. So I think the odds limit for that district is 45 feet, which is really tall compared to what the rules are today. There's like a 2-story limit and 30 feet, I think. So I wondered if that was better as a density bonus, as some type of bonus, as opposed to coming in as the rule. Because if it's 45, just like the existing buildings built to the max, that they would start at 45. And I just was wondering what your thoughts are about that.
So, and David, feel free to chime in, but when you're limited to 3-story buildings, and say it happens in an area like your downtown, you'll likely see a townhome product. And what's harder to pull off in 3 stories and starts to become possible in 4 stories are flats. And flats help bring unit size down, and that helps increase affordability. And increases your density for your site area. So what I liked about where the 45-foot is right now is that allows 4 stories with a 10-foot floor to floor, or maybe an 11-foot floor to floor if you got really creative with the parapet of the building. But it doesn't force it to be squished. We did, where you have the retail requires more height. And I believe that there's a slightly different height, like an extra 5 feet for buildings that have retail in that. But in terms of incentivizing affordable housing to be inserted into the project, David, do you think that, to me, my gut was 4 stories is needed to get just about anything off the ground that's not a townhouse.
I would agree. I would absolutely agree. I mean, it's hard to see at this particular juncture. Obviously, construction costs vary over time, et cetera. But it would be very difficult to do something that was 3-floor flats.
Townhouses tend to be big units, and then
Yeah.
they're not. They're in a higher price point.
And then my concern, as I've expressed to you, is just how that fits in with a historic downtown on Magnolia Avenue, where it's, for example, is there going to be a 4-story, 45-foot, 55-foot building adjacent to our movie theater, the historic theater, or even that's taller than Town Hall would be my guess. So dwarfing the fire station. So those are the things that make me concerned about having such tall buildings downtown without any objective or no right to deny them.
So our concern is that people will use the state density bonus to basically blow through the height limit. So you probably want as much control as you can have as it gets taller, and I think this is something we've discussed with other cities that I think every city attorney has kind of a different answer to it. But it's like, at what point does the state density bonus supersedes the odds in the zoning? So at what point, do they just blow through the odds if they use that density bonus? So the thinking is, if we can provide more guidelines for the taller buildings, you have a better shot at controlling more in the future.
Or
And
if
then-
you're basically giving the developer a choice between, here's a smoother, shorter odds process that gets you a 4-story building that pencils with relatively simple construction, versus a 3-story that will never pencil, and then your only choice is to go taller with the state density bonus. If those are your choices, we're hoping that the 4-story is something that they could bite on that, do that. It's like the lesser of the 2 evils. If your only choice is a building that's taking advantage of the Density Bonus Act, or one that is entitled by right. Affordable units does impact very quickly a developer's pro forma. So they do take that into account on, if they're mandated to provide a certain percentage of affordable units, that can be tricky.
And we do mandate that. So that's my issue that I brought up with you before that I really need to see too, is just how our existing and proposed housing element densities will work with these standards. Because if someone can't build the maximum density, then they're going to ask for waivers to everything. And then if building the maximum density blows through these objective standards, we need to look at what the density is to make sure that the form that we want to see can accommodate the density that's allowed. So I feel like that's a hugely critical piece of this analysis that we need to see is, can you build the densities that we're proposing, or are they just going to be forced right from the start to ask for waivers of everything?
Yeah, and Elise, I'm really glad you're asking that question. I just wanted to make sure that the part you mentioned, the Lark Theater having a 4-story next to it, or by something taller than City Hall. I mean, I'm wondering about the T4 SMS applying to downtown Larkspur and other areas. I almost feel like that, 4-block section, I wonder if it shouldn't have its own zoning to prevent things. And then, there's plenty of other places to build in the city. I want to see affordability, but it doesn't have to be downtown. I think Larkspur Landing's a perfect place. I think North Magnolia is another possible place. But, I'm wondering, again, as I look at just general guidance here and general things, I think the downtown needs to be considered specially. And I think this discussion about affordability is really important. And, we need to make it possible and realistic. But, I wonder if that trade-off, maybe it's unique zoning. And I don't know if you were getting at least, but, that's sort of what I read into your question.
Well, and here's an interesting consideration. I think if you, in our current odds, we require basically an 18-foot to between the first floor and the second floor if you have retail. And so if you add 2 stories on top of that for a 3-story building, then you are at 38 feet, nearly pushing 40. And then you add a 7-foot parapet to hide all your mechanical units and, all that stuff that goes up on a roof. So you hit that 45 pretty darn quick, even with a 3-story building, if there is retail on the first level. Now, what would be really interesting, Elise, and I don't know if you have the resources, but it might be worth like a half a day to take a laser, measure and go out and measure some of the parapets in your town to just be able to say how exactly tall these buildings are and have a sense of scale to how they would compare to these new buildings that would go into the downtown. And that could be something that your department could do for us, or that David and I go over there and take some measurements on the buildings. But I think getting an idea, okay, what's a new building look like next to one of these existing buildings? That's a question we'll need to answer. The other thing, Gabe, the lot sizes are so tiny in downtown Larkspur. I mean, they are tiny, that once you get over 3 floors, you have to have multiple exits. And once your building floor plate is, if it's over 3,000 square feet, you have to have more exits. So what's really tough is some of your sites in downtown Larkspur are so small, it would be hard to get, or almost financially disincentive to put 2, fire escapes in the building. And so that might also, restrict some of the smaller sites from getting developed with greater density because just the sites are so small.
But, just think 6 or 8 years ahead, the Nazarian property, where we have all the, keys and that. I mean, if that were to look like 1,700, in your demo, I think, to me, that wouldn't really be a good direction. I mean, I think putting in all those units is great, but, one of the objectives I have is to try to really, just like, the downtown of all 11 cities in Marin have pretty unique downtown areas, and they define the character. San Anselmo's, Fairfax's, and I'm just especially protective of that area. That's the point I'm trying to emphasize. And other than that, I mean, I really, I do the 3-unit a year thing is really disappointing, and I'm looking for every way to make it work and affordable housing. So I don't want to, I really want to keep that clear. It's just the downtown I'm talking about. And there are some lots that are really going to open up, which are not as small as you said. And, I think they might go for 45 or higher. And that to me is concerning.
Just so you know, because I worked in the downtown and done added second stories to a couple of those buildings. And most of them are, all of them except for the Blue Rock and City Hall are 2-story buildings, and their parapets are not that high. I would guess that maybe you have 30 feet. You have a 10-foot bottom floor that's on grade, essentially. Nobody steps up. So, and then, a couple of feet between floors and another 8 or 9 or 10 feet. So you're probably not above 30 feet on 85% of them anyway.
Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, Ryan, we put also a stipulation in the downtown area of not consolidating lots into large areas, and I think that's one of the things that will preserve the character. Because if you have a really small lot, you're really limited to how tall you can go. It just doesn't work, you know, financially as a development. So
yeah, we wanted to, you know, it's the, you know, the cadence of your storefronts and buildings that change on Magnolia Avenue is really appealing with that small fine grained lot. And so we have a provision in there that says you're that someone can't come in and buy 3 lots, tear down 3 buildings and build 1 building. Because that would just transform Larkspur quickly into, you know, anything else. But Gabe, we'll take a look at the building height thing. Elise, it would be helpful to get some point of references for like your 4 tallest buildings or just your 4 landmark buildings or something, so that we kind of know. And it would be great to point to, hey, you know, this building's 36 feet tall, et cetera. That would give some context. I think a really valuable context to the odds and help us understand where to set that limit.
Right, and as you see in the odds, they were using the Blue Rock as one of the models.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I also, I mean, I'm hoping that, you know, if we're looking at an HCD reading our draft, you know, at least my intention here is not at all to reduce affordable housing or any development. It's just, again, I just think, I don't know if San Anselmo, Fairfax, you know, Novato did this, but, you know, their downtown areas are, you know, historic, and they attract business. In fact, you know, they give the town its soul. And I kind of feel that's all I'm, you know, really wanting to reflect in our final product.
And just out of curiosity, mentioning what Gabe just said, where does the historic preservation?
Yeah, I was about to ask that question. I mean, that's got to trump kind of everything.
We were going to bring that up tonight because it's something that we're working on, but it's something that I'm working on because I'm concerned about that too, because once something is in the housing element as a by right site, there's no protection of the historic resource unless there's an objective standard, and it's very difficult to make an objective standard related to historic resources. So
right,
some ideas, I've thrown some ideas to the city attorney to see if they would be considered objective enough in terms of having a historical consultant review the project and make specific requirements that are objective. I'm not sure if that is going to fly. But it's definitely a concern that between protection of environmental resources, the historic structures, and then also cultural resources on some of the sites downtown, that if we don't have any discretion, we need to have some sort of standards in place, some conditions that would apply to the project.
Yeah, thanks.
So we'll get back to you about that, but right now we don't have an answer yet. It's just, and then we need an answer because obviously approval of this document is subject to CEQA, and if we're doing something that's going to impact historic resources, we would have to address it when we're adopting this document.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last thing we want is something that's going to jeopardize our historic status in the downtown. I think that's an important feature of our community, and we can't jeopardize it.
Would you like to see if anyone in the audience has anything to say? We have 2 people, Mr. Hurd and Mr. Holmes. If you have any comments, please feel free to raise your hand. Don't see any hands raised.
Up to good work.
Oh.
Okay, well,
that's it for public comment.
Yeah, thanks, James and Riley, for your contributions to tonight's discussion. It was very helpful. And Riley, particularly your experience in other jurisdictions was timely and appropriate.
Yeah, but I had a question for Brock, because he was probably on the planning commission when that first design was approved on Magnolia. I was wondering, were you on the planning commission when that commercial residential project went through?
Which one's that, Elise?
The one that was one of the examples, that 265 where the wine bar and real estate office are now?
No, I wasn't.
Okay, because I was just curious what the concern was the first design. Was it just like too much grading? And but I guess you won't be able to answer that.
Yeah, no. I actually did a design study of that for somebody else. We remodeled the historic building next door.
Okay, and I see Mr. Holmes has his hand raised, so maybe he knows. I'm going to let you speak, Mr. Holmes. Go ahead.
James Holmes, thank you. There is a flat statement in the EIR, and I wish I had the page citation, but it's a flat statement that says that one of the mitigating factors that reduces the aesthetic impact is that the downtown historic district does not have to be more than 2 stories. So it's a very flat statement, and I remember that the argument is in the EIR that the 3 stories could have an impact, but the downtown area you can keep it to 2 stories. So if we can find that that statement, that would be
that'd be helpful.
I think,
yeah.
That would be very helpful. I certainly agree that we should make sure that we have every level of protection that, for our downtown that is consistent with other similarly situated downtowns, so that we will not have a situation where somebody who is looking to build something that can't go anywhere else can go to Larkspur, and we don't become the fallback place. And in that connection, I wonder if there are no. I heard the reference to the removal of style and architectural guidelines, but I wonder if, given the downtown area, if that is not one place where some sort of style and architectural guidelines might continue to be relevant, particularly if other similarly situated Marin County historic downtowns have some sort of architectural guidelines. Thank you.
And I just wanted to mention that the environmental impact report for the general plan 2040, that wasn't based on the current housing element. So there is, it is a document that would need to be revised, or there may need to be supplemental CEQA prepared in order to apply it to the current housing element. So certain things in that document might be transferable for review, but there's additional work that has to be done for the environmental review of the housing element. So you'll be seeing more with that. Either there's a few different options the city has, but we'll probably be revising the CEQA document in order to make it appropriately cover the housing element. So if there's no other comments, I think the only other item on the agenda is adjourning. Let's see, did I already close my agenda? Oh, here it is. Public comment, just general public comment time. If there's someone who has a comment on something that's not on the agenda, this is the time to comment. Mr. Holmes has his hand raised. I'll let you speak, but I'm not sure if you have something to say or your hand's just still raised. If you have something, okay, go ahead.
No additional comments. Thank you.
Okay. So you can adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so very much for everybody's contribution. We look forward to this coming months. It's going to be busy and getting this ready to go.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, and thank you, David and Ryan, for all that work for that presentation. That was really useful.
Sure.
Helpful
Thank
to
you.
see how they applied.
And please send your comments in over the next 2 weeks so we can incorporate it and bake it into the document.
Yeah,
Right.
and Elise, you're gonna kind of generate
collect those.
a Word
I'll
copy
send an
of the-
email
of the-
and I can print out hard copies so you have something to mark up if you want to. Oh, this is, you want Word copy of this might be more difficult. That's not possible. Word
Oh,
copy
no,
of
no,
the
no, no, that,
housing-
yeah, no, yeah, that,
Yeah,
yeah,
Word
that's
copy
what
of the
I'm
housing
talking
element,
about.
I will try to get you if I
Yeah,
can get that.
that's
I
what I
should
was
be able
talking
to.
about. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Great.
So markup copies of this would be fine. We could scan them or get the comments from you somehow if you, however you want to do it.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Uh,
Thanks for
Elise,
your time.
Can you put the updated copy of the ODD and out on?
Yeah, I'll put it in the basket. I've got an extra one at my desk, so I could put it out there tomorrow.
Terrific, thanks.
All right.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Elise. Yeah.
Thanks.
see you, bro.